Hey everyone, another fantastic guest here. Today I have Ross Dawson, one of my favorite folks on Twitter, futurist, author, entrepreneur. What did I miss, Ross? What else can I call you?
That'll do for now. I always keep plenty on. But that's a reasonable high level description.
Well, you're from the lovely city of Sydney. You're here in New York for the week, and you have a new book, Thriving on Overload: The Five Powers for Success in a World of Exponential Information. I've started reading it. I'm really excited to finish it. But tell us, where did the book idea come from? Tell us about the genesis of the book.
Well, it's actually 25 years ago. So I was first setting out from corporate world doing my own thing, and just struck me. Okay, we've got lots of technology to help us with information, and we've got all sorts of culture to help organizations work. But the thing which organizations are not addressing is the capabilities of individuals, to use our brains to take in information. And that was 25 years ago. We had too much information. We've got a little bit more now. And so it's simply this idea that the fundamental, thing which we need to succeed today is the cognitive capabilities, is the processes, the structures, the routines, it's the habits, it's whatever it is which enables us to thrive, to find what is valuable in the excess of information, to be able to see opportunities, make better decisions, work better. I mean, this is the fundamental skill. So you, Evan, for example, and a number of other people we know are information masters. But you've probably just worked that out by yourself. You didn't do this at university. And I think a lot of the information masters I speak to aren't even fully conscious of how they do it. And I think there's just enormous value in starting to be conscious. How is it that we can improve? Because it is just a fundamental capability of success. And so the book tries to unravel and to lay out as much as possible the practices and the processes where people can prosper in a world where we have arguably too much information, but just enough if we think about it the right way.
That's a great point. And I feel like I'm trying to survive in an era of information overload. Thriving is a whole nother question. So there's a lot of talk about companies, dealing with data and information and sorting and managing that. But we don't talk about individuals. Is this book meant to be a practical kind of framework or a road blueprint or roadmap?
Yeah, absolutely. And I set out to make it inspiring, as in to inspiring people see that there's a positive side to this, and pragmatic, as useful as possible. So every chapter has exercises at the end of it. One of my favorite comments in the interviews I've been doing recently was from the We Study Billionaires podcast, where the host, Trey Lockerbie, said, I don't think I've seen a book this packed with resources since the 4-hour work week. And so that's 15 years ago. And that's the intent, to pack it with resources, to make it pragmatic as possible.
Well, no disrespect to the 4-hour work week, but I haven't seen many entrepreneurs working 4 hours a week, but I love the idea. So I'm hoping for some practical takeaways. What about those takeaways, tips, tricks, best practices? Can you give 1, 2, 3 examples of advice for us, information junkies? What have you seen out there in your research?
Well, there's a massive amount. Depends on what level which we take it, and I think there's a lot of tactics which we can take, and I think one of those is, that's a little bit more than a tactic, is being really clear about how we allocate our time and attention. And so, a chapter on attention is sort of looking at the different types of attention that we have, including from, what it is when we're scanning for information, how it is we're assimilating information and taking it in, how it is we're giving time for ourselves. But for example, in scanning for news headlines, that's something which we all tend to do a lot, probably more than we need. And thus the word doom scrolling, where since most news is a fairly doom would probably be a pretty good description of it. So the idea is to say, all right, let's say I'll spend 10 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Just choose a time to say, this is the time I'll allocate to scanning the news. And then I am going to stop. And if I really need to, I will put in another time slot later in the day. But in between, I will not look at the news headlines. And so that's just one simple thing to do, but actually can make a massive amount of difference. Another one is simply every week, a minimum of 2 hours where you block everything out. And it doesn't matter when it is during the week, but it's one time during the week. Say, I'm going to turn off all notifications, all distractions, all incoming. I'll tell everybody I'm not doing that. And for 2 hours, you choose one thing to do where you dive in, you do that well. And part of that is getting better at being focused on one thing. This is our brain needs to train ourselves to get used to that. We need to exercise the muscle of attention, and that's one of the powerful ways of doing it. So those are a couple of quite specific things, but at the high level, it's building a personal information plan. Something where you work out what it is that works for you and then stick to it, being conscious about it. So there's a course which we've launched at the same time, an online course, which is an interactive course. It's not just a series of content. It's taking people through that process of designing their own personal information plan. And you don't need the book, you don't need the course, though I'm sure they're extremely helpful. But it's just this idea of saying, okay, I'm going to set a plan for myself to be more effective with my information. And just from this conversation, or maybe reading the book if it's if you want to, but just having that intention. These are the things I'll do. These are the times that I'll do it. This is why I'm doing this. I think anybody can just spend half an hour to set their own personal information plan, to decide what it is they will do differently and do better, because so much of this is unplanned, unstructured, just following our whims, as opposed to putting the structure, which can give us far more power in a world of unlimited information.
Brilliant observations. What did you discover in researching the book on the effect of information overload on our mental health, on our physical health, well-being? Is that something you can quantify?
Not so much quantify, but there is clear evidence. So I've dug in quite extensively into the neuroscience behind the overload, and one critical factor is that we do tend to get epinephrine, known as adrenaline, pumping in our brain when we feel an excess, overwhelm, where we're not able to cope, which actually, not surprisingly, takes away from our ability to do it. So this is a negative spiral when we start to feel overwhelmed, making us less able to deal with that, which makes us more overwhelmed. And so part of that, the response to that is clearly where we need to, I don't actually talk about breathing techniques in the book, but that's just one example of things that we can do to pull ourselves to a state where we are not feeling the overwhelm. And we can also chunk things down. All right, seems like 100 things to do. All right, let's chunk it down. Let's just do 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's forget everything else for now. So I've got something which my brain can process and I can get on with. One of the other really important things from neuroscience, which is known for some time, but has been very clearly demonstrated in more recent research, is that there is no such thing as multitasking. Our brain is a serial processor. It is not a parallel processor. So when people think they are multitasking, their brain actually is switching from tasks with a very high cognitive overload. So we do need to learn that, in fact, trying to multitask will put more strain on us, and again, in that negative cycle, lead to us being less effective.
Yeah, it's really interesting, in particular with learning and education with children who are bombarded by online content, streaming, social media. I look at my older teenage kids, early 20s, and it's just constant scrolling, right? It's the TikTok, Instagram kind of phenomenon. As a parent, what do you suggest there? Is it clamping down on usage? Are there tricks or other things to limit use of media, social media consumption by kids?
It's a really tough one, and as a parent myself, I also grapple with it, and I don't think there's any easy solutions. And I'm not a big believer personally in hard limits. So sometimes you do need them, at particular ages, in terms of saying, all right, well, you've got a limited period of time. One of the things I think is, and again, there's only so much you can do with young people forming their own identities, but is getting to understand quite how negative the impact is
Hmm.
in terms of their ability to be focused and to function. And to the degree which you can, to introduce them just sort of like simple focus exercise, even just for a few minutes at a time, um, and trying to for them to actually experience what it's like to not be checking for a while, to try to pull that in to and introduce them to the focus apps, which means that you can switch off for a period of time, and rather than imposing them, to let them discover that they can be useful and they are actually feel more empowered when they can
Hmm.
switch things off for a while, and it's not the end of the world. So it is highly challenging. Personally, I don't believe in sort of being too directive or limiting, but trying to guide them in the direction where they can see the differences and the opportunities from spending time which is more focused.
Brilliant. Great advice. You and I both spend a lot of time thinking about organizations, enterprises, and the similar effect in business, in the enterprise, whether you call it Zoom fatigue, Slack overload, email overload. I mean, we're bombarded, in our business lives with information, with content, messaging, synchronous, asynchronous. Any tips on managing that kind of overload from an organizational standpoint?
So this is a critical point, is understanding this idea of allocation of attention for individuals in an organization. And I think one approach, PepsiCo is one company that's done this, but it's basically empowering teams to choose times when they will not be contacted, for example. And so rather than just saying, okay, the team, we're all working on stuff, we're always on Slack or whatever other communication channel, we're always engaged, to carve out and say, sit at a particular time every day, or one morning a week, we will be able to not be in the constant to and fro, and to carve out time for specific activities. And hopefully to encourage, okay, well, this is my project. This is the one which I'm not going to be interrupted in, to give and allow and encourage every individual to communicate to all of their team to say, do not contact me, do not expect me to respond in particular time periods. And they can choose those time periods. So this becomes a norm, that you are not just a subject of everything that's barraged at you, but everyone is given the power to say, okay, I understand you need to contact me, but there are times when I will not be contacted because I'm going to get into a state, I'll be focused, I'll be doing extraordinary things that I can't be doing if I'm interrupted all the time. And this is giving power to individuals and teams. I think this is kind of just a cultural thing, and one which can be very specific and very easy to put into practice.
No, I love it. Great advice, particularly in this world of hybrid work. And finally, you're the author of 5 books. How do you focus and direct your attention to writing? I'm terrible at that. If I'm lucky, if I can get a blog post out. Do you have any advice to writers, aspiring writers, who have problems putting pen to paper, so to speak?
Well, it's exactly what I was saying. As you do need to carve out chunks of time, and I I can actually find things which are useful to do on a book in 10 or 15 minutes. I have that free somewhere. But most of it, I have to just dive in and forget the rest of the world. So what I try to do is I schedule meetings first thing in the morning because of my time zones, and have a coffee, and then for 3 hours, if possible, that's my time for the books. Then I've got meetings in the afternoon or whatever else, and catch up with emails and so on. But I create a chunk of time, and I can't do it every day necessarily. There's stuff which I got to get done, but every day that I can, for me, and also it depends on your chronotype. That is, essentially your individual time schedule. That's some people it's different times of the day. For me, 10 to 1 is perfect. I can get up slowly, engage with the world, get a few things done, have a coffee, and then I can just power into that, and then I can sort of get into less focused periods of time. And that's essentially how you get a book done.
Fantastic. Well, some great advice. Really appreciate your time. I know you're on your media tour in New York and heading back to Sydney. I bet it's a little bit easier to write sitting in Sydney Harbor, watching the ships roll by. So look forward to the next book. In the meantime, love following you on Twitter. You're very engaging and interesting, and your posts are great. So thanks for joining.
It's been a great pleasure, Evan. Thanks for making the time.
Likewise. Take care.